Good morning to all of you. Very happy to be here in Pescara. I don't say the same thing every place that I am there. I've been to Italy at least 25, 30 times. I teach short course in Rome, in Louis every year. I've been to Ancona twice, but not to Pescara. So thank you for all of those who worked so hard to invite me. Franco, of course, Giovanni, who came with his wife to Rome to convince me to come here, and I'm very happy that I did it. First time I heard about intangibles was a few years ago when I was 27 years old. And I was a student, doctoral student at the University of Chicago. And my dissertation advisor, my mentor, so to speak, a very famous professor there, told me one day that he's going to speak about research and development to managers, to accountants, and others. If I want to join him, he just wanted someone to be with him on the way. And I said, of course, I'll come. And I was sitting in the audience. He was standing here, huge audience, several hundreds people. And at that time, people smoked even in the room, so there was an ashtray, a big metal ashtray. And he was standing, and while he was speaking, he was playing with the ashtray, moving from one hand to the other, and it was very strange to me, because I saw him in lectures before. He never did such a thing. So he finished his presentation, and then, of course, came questions. He spoke about research and development that should be considered as an asset, not an expense like a salary or rent, should be presented as an asset in the accounting of the firm. And the immediate question was, Professor said, how can you think about R&D as an asset? It's maybe will not be successful in the future, this and that. And all of a sudden, the ashtray drops and made a huge noise, because it went on and on and on, and he waited. When the noise finished, he said, do you really think that only assets that make such a noise when they fall are assets, in this case? Which, of course, made the point about intangibles. So one definition of intangibles is that when they fall, like patents and brands, they don't make any noise. And I told you everything I know about intangibles. So I thank you for coming. No. I have a few more things to say. I started really dealing with intangibles many years later when I was a professor at University of California, Berkeley, very famous university. I was a professor both in the business school and in the law school. And I was also a partner in a very successful consulting firm. And we were several partners. I was the one in charge of finance, valuation, mergers and acquisition. And one day I got a very interesting case. A phone company in western United States, in Oregon, California, then Arizona, was called Pacific Bell. And Pacific Bell was the first that started developing cellular operation, cellular phone operation commercially. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the cellular phone technology, probably few, but cellular phones technology were developed in the 70s by Bell Laboratories. Bell Laboratories were very large laboratories of hundreds of scientists that really was financed by the local telephone company, AT&T, American Telephone and Telegraph, which was a monopoly at the time. And they developed the cellular technology. They got patents on the cellular technology, but they didn't know if this is a commercial idea if people will ever use cellular phones. So they hired a very famous consulting company. Everyone here heard about this consulting company, and that's why I won't mention the name. And this consulting company wrote a report, which I saw, 178-page long. But the punchline, the conclusion of the report is that this is a beautiful technological development, but not a commercial development. No one, they said, will go in the street and talk on the phone. And because of this very smart idea by a consulting firm, they abandoned their patents. They didn't renew the patents on cellular technology. And in the 80s, when companies started developing it, the technology was really free. So coming back to my story, I was working as a consultant for Pacific Bell, the telephone company. Pacific Bell developed the first one, maybe in the world, definitely in the United States, a large activity of cellular phones. But at that time, phone companies were regulated. So every time they wanted to do something, increase rate, invest or something, they had to get permission. It took years to get permission. So they wanted to, what is called spin off, take the part of cellular phones and give it to shareholders and stay with regular phone service. All kinds of what's called advocacy group, people who work for the citizens, objected to this. And they said, you developed cellular phones at our expense, at the expense of people who pay for the phone, at our risk. Now you're going to give the whole thing to shareholders, not to the people who are your customers using the phones. So they went to court, and the court appointed me to value the cellular phone part of Pacific Bell. This was called AirTouch. AirTouch was then later bought by other companies. And I had to come up with a value, because the judge said, the value that you will come up with, I will split half and half to shareholders, half to customers, which seemed reasonable, but I had to come with a value. And how do you come with a value of a company that has no assets at all? They had a few office buildings and some computers and that, but nothing serious. All their assets were a franchise, were spectrum, were ideas, lots of people who developed the product. The first cellular phone was this size, and it became smaller and smaller and smaller until it can get to your carpet. And this was my first challenge in valuing companies that don't have any traditional assets. There are no factories, there are no machines, there is no inventory. These are easy to value. There are markets in these assets, so you get the values from the market. But on intangibles, there are no markets in intangibles. So I had to struggle with this, which brought me into this beautiful world of intangibles. It's like 25 years ago. And I both continued my work professionally with companies, some of it I'll share with you today, and I started doing research on it. What really, and I don't say it in boasting, what really distinguished me from all the others that were like gurus of intangibles was that I did research on it, economic research on intangibles, so I could come up with facts rather than speaking about ideas. People have to develop ideas and so on and so on. So over the years, the movement, this was a movement, still is, of intangibles, went through several stages. The first stage was huge excitement. All of a sudden, we have entirely different assets that we were used to for hundreds of years. And journalists started writing about these assets. Books were published. There was a famous book published in the United States, Rembrandt's in the Attic. Attic is the top floor in the house where people throw things that they don't need. And the book claimed that all companies have all kinds of very valuable intangibles like patents that they don't even know about. They don't use. So it's like a painting by Rembrandt, which is in the attic you don't know about. So this was the first stage. The second stage were attempts to understand what type of assets they are, to define them, to classify them. People came with all kinds of classification, relational capital and customer capital and this capital and this capital. I didn't find all these things very useful. Then the next stage was people started thinking about measurement and reporting of intangibles, which was interesting. Then, particularly in Northern European countries, Denmark, Sweden, they started developing intellectual capital reports. And it went by the name of IC, Intellectual Capital Reports, in which company reported how much they invest in R&D and how much they invest in people and how much they invest. It wasn't really successful because most of these reports were just public relations. Company wanted to show how great they are and how good they are and so on. Not useful for real users of report like investors. The next stage was the most important stage of all, is helping managers in managing the intangibles. Turned out that most managers don't know how to do it. 15 years ago, I was approached by the management of DuPont, which is the largest chemical company in the world, and they asked me to estimate, not tell stories, actually estimate with numbers the return on investment. How much do you get from $1 invested in 3 types of R&D that is aimed to develop new products, 2 types of R&D that are aimed to reduce cost of production, and brands. So they spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on R&D and brand development, but they didn't know how much they get out of it. For managerial decisions, which we call resource allocation, spend more on R&D or less on R&D? Spend more on brands or less on brands? How do you make these decisions? With physical assets, it's simple. Airplanes, if they are full, then you know you have to buy more airplanes. If they are not full, then you don't buy more airplanes. But with intangibles, it's extremely complicated. And they didn't have an idea. Every year they set and determined the budget of R&D and brands, but they really didn't know how to do it. And when we estimated, I did it, by the way, with a brilliant Italian PhD student, Fabrizio Ferri, that was in our school. I remember when I presented the work to the board, and I came up with numbers. This type of R&D returns 17%. This type of R&D returns 22%. This type of R&D, 5%. Because I looked at the future cash flows that came from each vintage of R&D, so I could determine the return, what's called ROI, return on investment. I still remember I presented to the board. This item was slated between 1 and 2:30, the board of DuPont. At 7 o'clock in the evening, they were still discussing my work. And the door opens. This was in a very plush country club. The door opened, and someone said, "We cannot continue heating the dinner because it will be completely destroyed. You have to stop." And over dinner, when I sat with some board members, I said, "You know why this was so interesting? Because people usually come to us, and I apologize, with bullshit. DuPont has to be more environmental, DuPont has to be more this, DuPont has to be more this. We don't know how to deal with these things. You came with numbers. And with numbers, we know if we move $100 million from this type of R&D to this type of R&D, that's what we will get." So when I talk about managerial issues, problems with intangibles, these are very, very difficult problems. With physical assets, it's easy. I just gave you one example, DuPont. Then another wave of development of the intangible thought was governments, particularly the EU. The EU was convinced, and I think with good reasons, that innovation in many countries, many European countries, is not very high. And they thought that by increasing investment in intangibles, they will increase innovation. They even came up with some kind of a standard, 2% of R&D, some kind of a benchmark. And the current, I'm going quickly over the history of the thinking, working about intangibles. The current issues of intangibles are mainly the social consequences of intangibles. Turn out that they are very, very interesting, serious, difficult to deal with, and no one really knows how to satisfactorily solve them, but I'll get to this in a moment. I want to start with this, just to give you an idea of magnitude. This is for the US economy. This was done by two well-known economists, Carol Corrado and Charles Sultan, starting in a paper they published in American Economic Review, which is the top journal for economists, and they updated it to 2016-17 at my request. This is for the US economy, the private sector, without government, without universities, total investment in intangibles. This is the increasing line, the blue line, and total investment in tangible assets, plant, machinery, factory, structures, inventories. And you can see an incredible change of this economy roughly in the mid-80s. Investment in tangible assets goes down and down and down and down. So when people speak about bringing factories back to the United States, bringing manufacturing back to the United States, that's not reality. This is politics, but it's not reality. Reality is exactly the opposite. The investment in intangibles is increasing. The top right that you have there in 2016 is 2.1 trillion with a T dollar. Trillion is 1,000 milliards. Okay? So that's an enormous amount of money, and that's that investment every year in intangibles, and it's growing and growing and growing. The situation today is that intangibles are the only assets that create growth, create value in companies. Pharmaceutical companies cannot create value from laboratory equipment, from machines. because all their competitors have exactly the same machines. You create value when you differentiate yourself, when you distinguish yourself. With physical assets, you cannot distinguish yourself. They are what economists call commodities. They are like on the shelves. Everyone can go and buy them. This is passé. Those of you who are familiar with accounting, everything that appears on balance sheet of companies, which are physical assets, is passé. When I have to teach it, once in 2 years, I have the unfortunate situation that I have to teach one accounting course at NYU. I feel embarrassed to speak about inventory and about machines and about account. Who cares about this in this economy? So that's the situation in the United States. In other countries, I took it from OECD data. You see it here. China tries extremely hard to come close. They are still very, very far with 770 billion, which is milliard investment. Sweden is extremely high, particularly relative to the size of the economy. And then you have France and Germany and UK, and you see the others, including this beautiful country, which is unfortunately very, very low in terms of investment in intangibles. So you got the picture with respect to the magnitude. We are talking here about a revolution. Not a small development, a revolution which is definitely going to continue. This is not something that will come down. We will never come back to the industrial era. So let me say a few words about intangibles, now that I mentioned it about 100 times. What are they? So there are all kinds of definitions. These are assets, resources, without a physical embodiment. I recently saw a beautiful definition of intangibles in a dictionary, the shortest I've ever seen. Intangibles are non-tangible. This is genius, this type of a definition. Black is not white. We define a color in this case. Anyway, there are lots of origins for intangibles. One origin, or cluster if you want, is the research activities of companies. But it's not just research. Smart companies learn from others. Smart companies send their executives to academic conferences in physics, in chemistry, in robots, in nanotechnology. They speak to others, so it's research and learning. And from this come, of course, the research and development, and from research and development, patents and trademarks and other types of what's called intellectual property, which you can really define that it legally belongs to you. I'm sure that all of you heard about patents, but I want to give you an idea of how difficult it is to manage, not just for scientists to come up with the ideas, for managers to make money out of it, to use it. And that's something that I will emphasize again and again. Ideas don't create value. Not they are not important, they are very important. But if you are interested in creating value, you have to proceed. So IBM, that's a company that everyone here heard about, a giant company. You probably don't remember, but in the early 90s, IBM was almost bankrupt. They missed all the big developments in computers because of poor management. And then they brought a new CEO by the name of Lou Gerstner, which was a great surprise because he didn't come from technology. Everyone said, how can someone who managed a food company, American Express, how can someone like this manage the largest technology company? He completely overturned IBM within a few years and made it the same giant as before. When he retired in 2001, he wrote a book. Also, elephants can dance, meaning that even giant companies like IBM, you can have them move and change and dance and so on and so on. But not being a technology person, he went around, and particularly the research centers of IBM. IBM has many research centers with thousands of researchers. IBM gets on average 10 to 15 patents every day, new patents. They get more patents than most countries in the world. So everywhere that Lou Gerstner came, people told him about the huge, beautiful patents that IBM gets. And he was just a commercial person. He just common sense. He said, what are we doing with all these patents? 15 a day. Hundreds a year. What are we doing with them? And they told him, well, some of those patents we developed. He said, how many? He said, about 10%, 12%. What do you do with the patents you don't develop? He said, nothing. He said, okay, from now on, every patent that is not developed or is not planned to be developed within the next year, I want out. I want sold to others. I want license. You can either sell a patent or license it for a specific period of time. And people said, how can we do it? We cannot benefit our competitors with our ideas. He said, we don't benefit anyone. We get money from this. More than 20% of IBM profits comes from selling intellectual property, in this case. This is management. So idea is one thing. Using the ideas in a way that creates value is an entirely different thing. This is the challenge, the main challenge with intangibles. So some intangibles come from research and development. Some intangibles come from, are related to customers, like brands that everyone here heard about. So everyone heard about brands. Very few people know what a brand is. Most people confuse brands with names, with famous names. Some of you may remember many years ago, not the young one, there was a camera Polaroid, the first one that you got the photo immediately. This was a huge invention, and it was big business for quite a long time. But Polaroid until now is a famous name. It's not a brand, the company is bankrupt. Brand is something that allows you to charge more for your product than competitors. Otherwise, you don't have a brand. Xerox is a very well-known name. People even say, I'm going to Xerox a document. That's not a brand. Xerox struggles to survive against competitors. Bare aspirin, some people take, particularly the older one, take bare aspirin a day for healthy heart. Bare aspirin is a brand because bare aspirin is more expensive than others. And nevertheless, people buy it. Amazon is a huge brand. I saw recently a beautiful dissertation, PhD dissertation at MIT, and the guy looked at 500,000 transactions that people made buying books. But these are the people that had access to 5 different sites that provided them with competitive prices. Unlike me, when I want to buy a book, I don't even bother with whether there is a cheaper book. I go straight to Amazon. I don't have the time to. But these people really looked at 5 different, and then they made the decision. In 17%, 1/7 of the cases, Amazon had the lowest price relative to the others. Nevertheless, almost 80% of the people bought the book from Amazon. After they saw that they can get it $1 less, $1.25 less, this is a brand. So if you have such a brand that can enable you to generate this type of a profit, then of course this is a huge intangible. Information technology creates huge intangibles. Human resources, not the human themselves. Humans are very tangible. Most of us are also very heavy. So we are not intangible, but the capabilities that come from training, from specific compensation techniques, how to get people to devote themselves more to work. This is an intangible. And just a minute on probably the most valuable intangible of all. Economists call it organizational capital. That's the way of doing business, organizational capital. Successful companies do business differently. Just do differently. Walmart, I don't know if there are Walmarts in Italy, but it's the largest company in the world in terms of sales and employment. They employ more than 2 million people. Walmart was the first to employ a system in which when you buy an item in the store and you pay for it and the cashier reads the barcode, the information goes not to the inventory of Walmart, the information goes to a supplier, to Unilever, telling them someone just took a box of detergent out of the shelf in the store in Miami, let's say. So with this ingenious way, they completely transferred the most expensive thing that retailers have, which is the inventory management, the supply in, they completely shifted it to their suppliers. The supplier now has the responsibility of making sure that this box of detergent is replaced in this store. This is called organization capital, the way you organize the business differently than others. And the whole idea of intangibles is different, unique. Otherwise, they are not valuable. Okay. Once you have all these beautiful intangibles, or some of these beautiful intangibles, then you have to create value from them. Otherwise, they're just like chairs. They will sit there and won't do anything. So you have to have a management, and the ultimate stage is innovation. Intangibles create innovation. New things, new ideas. I'm sure that you have Netflix here in Italy. Yeah, it's all over the world. Netflix, it was the first one, but one of the first to come up with this recommendation algorithm. And I remember a couple of years ago, when I went to Netflix, there was a question there. Before I went to it, was a question, who is watching? Baruch, others, and it really made me mad. Said, what kind of an invasion of privacy is this? What do they care? Who is watching? I pay them for the service. What do they care? And then someone told me this is for your benefit because they want to match movies, series exactly for you. Okay? Not for others. And indeed, now, when I go to Netflix, it's 97% your taste, 98%. If it's below 95, I don't even look at it. That's how much I trust with the recommendation algorithm. This is an intangible. Netflix CEO said recently that 80% of all the streaming come from the recommendation algorithm. People respond to the algorithm. It's mind-boggling. So I guess you get a general idea of what intangibles are. Now, the benefits of intangibles, we spoke about it, are of course huge. I just mentioned here that everyone talks about the US stock market, which really has an unprecedented performance in the last 7, 8 years. But much of this performance comes from 5 companies, from Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. People even call them FANG in this case. These companies are totally intangible. They don't have anything tangible in them. That's what moves economies. There are, of course, huge developments that come from pharmaceutical research. I don't have to tell you. Advances in media, entertainment, telecommunication, social media, democratization of information. This is very important. Used to be many years ago, information was just the privilege of university professors, a few scholars. Renaissance time in Italy, how many people had access to information? A few, very few. Fortunately, these were all geniuses, but very few. I remember when I had to write a term paper in school, I had to go to a library, I had to look in encyclopedias. I see my grandson, 10-year-old, on his phone, he prepares a term paper. Just Google this, Google that, Google that. He has all the information. It's just incredible what we have. Products are customized to you. But I want to say a few words about the challenges. And these are challenges to individuals, to governments, to societies that intangibles create. It's not just good. So one of the things that comes with the digital economy, intangible economy, is that people get almost everything free, and it somehow creates in people the sense of entitlement, a right to. I hear a lot of people say, there is a right to network. Everyone in Africa, in Asia, in this, has a right to be connected to the internet and get all the information. People speak about a right to drugs, a right to health care. Why should only rich people use drugs? Why not everyone for zero? Zero. This zero mentality is a very dangerous thing for the intangibles, because when no one pays for it, no one will develop the intangibles. As simple as that. I spoke with my grandson a few weeks ago, and on his phone he had a beautiful ringtone. He said, I want this ringtone. What is it? He said, it costs 89 cents. Cents. So for him, 89 cents was, why should I pay anything for it? He warned me not to take it. Till I calmed him down and said, I can afford 89 cents for this. So that's an issue that somehow you have to struggle with. Lots of complaints that Facebook shared information with others, but when they share information with others, they get money for it, and that's how they can provide the service free. It's not that I'm apologetic for Facebook. I'm not a consultant of Facebook, but we have to understand the reason why we get it free is that they use our information. So there were a hearing in the US Senate, and Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook was there, and all the senators hit him. We want regulation, we want to prohibit you from sharing, we want this, we want this. He didn't say it, but I knew once you do this, they are going to charge for the information. Someone has to pay for it. So these are the things that those intangibles brought, real issues that we didn't struggle with before. Huge increase in, of course, identity theft and cyberspace, which are completely new things that we didn't have before. This is a very interesting and troubling issue. It's called network effect. Network effect is the term that economists gave to a nature of the product which the value of the service to one user depends on the number of other users. When I buy a car, the benefit of the car or a refrigerator for me doesn't depend on how many other people buy the same car or refrigerator. I don't care, 5,000 million, 5 million. When I join a network like Facebook, I care how many people are connected there, because the more people there are there, the higher the benefit for me, in this case. So products that have this network effect tend to grow almost by themselves. You join those who already have lots of customers. Otherwise, who will cooperate with you? And it tends to create monopolies. So the monopolies that people are talking about of Google, of Facebook, of Amazon and others, it's not just getting to be a monopoly, it's because of this network effect. And there are huge questions for government, for EU, what to do with this. I heard suggestion breaking up Facebook into 5 companies. In my opinion, a silly suggestion. Breaking up this, breaking up that. But these are very difficult issues. You get almost like natural monopolies with intangibles. Nature of intangibles, just a few minutes. Nature of intangibles is that you have a huge investment at the beginning, and then the cost of producing the product is essentially zero. So if you develop a drug, today you may pay $2, $3, $4 million to develop an entirely new drug, but the pills, to produce the pills, then it basically costs zero. So how do you price this thing? Usually in economics, they tell you you price by marginal cost, how much it costs to produce an additional product, but the marginal cost of intangibles is zero. So some people say, it costs you to develop these drugs 1 cent, that's what I'm willing to pay. But there are today pills in the United States that you have to pay for one pill, $10,000, $20,000, because the producers say we have to cover our initial cost. But no one knows how to price these things. So I gave you some ideas about the challenges of intangibles, which are huge challenges. People are struggling with them, and not very successfully so far. I'll jump over a few, and I'll go to this. So this is really my main area. I'm a finance and accounting professor at NYU. Intangibles completely destroyed the financial reports of companies, the balance sheet, the income statement, the main information that goes to investors. Completely destroyed because accountants live like in the 16th century. mean, not all accountants, those who set accounting rules, and they regard the investment in intangibles, they regard as an expense. I'm not going to bore you with accounting, but the difference in accounting between investment and an expense is that investment creates future benefits, like a house. Expense, like salary, doesn't create any future benefits. You pay for past services. You want employees to continue working for you, you have to pay future salaries. So they say, since the benefits of intangibles are not completely certain, we expense them. And when they expense them, you get bizarre situations, and I'll jump, given that my time is almost closed, I'll show you the end result of this. This is, when I got this graph from my co-author Feng-Gu, I just couldn't believe it. So I took 2 PhD students and I said, rerun it. I want to be sure that it's true. This is the percentage of companies in the United States that report an annual loss, losing money. So you see that in 2017, that's the blue line that you see, between 40 and 50% of all US companies report losses. It's absurd. It's the best economy that the US had in like 30, 40 years. If you focus on high-tech and science-based pharma biotech company, that's the brown line at the top, 70% report losses, which of course is nonsense. They are not losing. It's just that the accountant expense the major investments that they have, so it appears as you have a loss. There's a beautiful biotech company that was recently acquired by a much larger biotech company, Gilead Technologies, for $12 million. And so when I saw the announcement that Gilead pays for this company $12 million, I went to the financial statement of this biotech company. What do I see? Every year they report a loss. All their R&D is expense, is considered as a regular expense. So here is a company that if you don't know, if you're just an investor, you're going to say is on the way to bankruptcy. $300 million loss every year. Those who understand, like the management of Gilead Sciences, knew, of course, that they have an incredible what's called pipeline, developing new cancer drugs, and they pay $12 million of it. So the negative effects, the problems of policymakers are widespread, but particularly affect investors. Investors don't get the information that they need. You heard about the company Tesla with the electric car. It's an incredible company. Our son-in-law, the husband of our daughter, has a big Tesla. I drove it. I never in my life had such a feeling like driving a company. Completely silent because it's electric. Everyone now is talking about what will happen to Tesla. First of all, they have a CEO who is undoubtedly Elon Musk, who is undoubtedly a genius, but also crazy. So he says all kinds of things, and he smokes marijuana in front of reporters and others. There's also competition comes in from other car companies. So there are all kinds of speculation. They will still be dominant. They will not be dominant. They will go bankrupt in a few. You would think that the financial reports, the balance sheet, the income statement, every 3 months of Tesla will provide information to investors. That's what they are designed to do. But if you look at the financial report, then Tesla has $4 million of losses. All this incredible R&D and design and other investment intangibles are expended, completely useless in this case. So we have these kinds of problems. Given my time, I will jump and say just a few words to complete the picture about challenges to managers. I already spoke a lot about challenges to managers. I gave you the example of IBM, the use of patents. I gave you the example of my work with DuPont. I think you got the sense that this is challenging. And for the young people here, this is extremely exciting. When I teach accounting or finance at NYU, I devote only one class to intangibles. I don't want it to make like I'm teaching what I do. So only one class. And then we have an evaluation. Every semester the same thing. This class was by far the most informative of all the classes. Why didn't you expand it? It's an incredible opportunity to work in this area, to become an expert and work in this area. What do I mean to become an expert? I'll just give you an example, and I'm finishing in 2 minutes. 2 months ago, a student called me at NYU, called me and said, Professor Lev, I must thank you. I said, thank for what? I got a job because of you. How? He said that he was interviewed, you know, the process of companies interviewing MBA students, and he was interviewed by Pfizer, which is the largest pharmaceutical company in the world. And he went through several levels of interviews. Apparently, he made a good impression because he got to the top level. He met with 3 executives of Pfizer. And one of them asked him the most unfair question that you can think of. It really shouldn't be asked in an interview. But he asked him, he said, what can you tell us about Pfizer that we don't know? I mean, it's absurd. These are people who work for Pfizer 20, 30 years, and they expect an MBA student to tell them. Maybe they wanted to test how quick he is in his response. So he said, for a moment, he said, I panicked. And then I remembered your class about intangibles. And in your class, you showed us how to re-engineer the income statement, how to take the expenses of R&D, take them out, capitalize them, compute a new income, new return on investment. And he said, that's what I told them. I told them, I can tell you what is your correct profit. So they said, what do you mean correct profit? Correct profit is what we publish. I said, no, what you publish is not the correct profit. Here is that, and he got the job. He probably got the job. I don't want to take all the credit. I'm sure he got the job for many other things. But getting involved, getting interested, reading about these things will advance you considerably. This is the future. This is the future. So the issues I mentioned here are issues that managers struggle with. Issues of pricing decisions, as I said before, when the cost of producing another unit of a disk or a pill or something is essentially zero, how do you price? Issues of evaluation of subsidiaries when earnings really don't tell the truth about the performance of companies. Issues of mergers and acquisitions, how do you value companies which have lots of intangibles in them? And of course, managers' compensation. What should you base compensation on? On earnings, which we know that is not working, on other measures. So beautiful, interesting issues. And I want to finish by summarizing what I was speaking about. Intangibles today, and by now you know, it's a huge spectrum of things, not just patents and brands. Remember the recommendation algorithm of Netflix. Remember reading the barcode of Walmart. Intangibles are the only way to grow. There is no way in the world for companies to succeed, be better than their competitors without significant successful deployment of intangibles. No other way. Absolutely no other way. Intangibles require very smart management, and I talked a lot about it, and I gave you all kinds of examples of challenges to managers. Intangibles require smart governments, not just heavy-handed, break up Google, break up Facebook. This is nonsense. Smart government, preparing people, preparing young people to work with these types of assets. One of the major reasons for inequality of income, and lots of people talk about it and are concerned with it for good reasons, it's increasing, is because of these intangibles. Most people are not able to work with these new assets. They didn't get the right education to work with it. Incentives to increase intangibles. The Chinese, for the last few years, are paying money for every patent that a Chinese gets. If you get a patent from the patent office, you get something like $5,000, which is a huge incentive to think, but not just to think, to bring this thinking to fruition, to like a product, and then someone approves and gives you a patent on it. And a huge challenge for small countries, less developed countries. You don't have to do much in the United States to incentivize, to motivate intangibles. The people are already doing it. But all small countries, it's a huge issue. Their investment is essentially zero. They'll never be able to, I won't say even compete, somehow survive in this new world. And you don't have to be a huge country. Some very small countries like Denmark invest a lot in intangibles. You saw the numbers. Have great products. Israel, which I'm very familiar with, is called the startup nation. There are more startups in Israel per capita than in any other country in the world. You don't have to be big. You don't have to be powerful. But you have to think how to motivate particularly young people to realize the potential and then integrate within this beautiful machine. Thank you very much.